Yo, 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 yo. Yo. Okay, two-way frequency table. So today, vocabulary is pretty important. Frequency, two-way table, and then relative frequency. Relative frequency is going to be what we're going to focus on the majority of today, but you do need to know all of it. So, get these definitions down, and we'll use them throughout the lesson. So first we want to determine if there's association between the events. So in a two-way table, what we're doing is we're comparing two different things to figure out if one has to do with the other. So 100 teens were polled about whether or not they're required to do chores and if they have a curfew. So it's just a yes or no. Do you have to do chores? And then there's a yes or no. Do you have a curfew? And then we organize the data in this two-way table. This is considered a two-way table. So if I look here, like this 16 right here, this represents there are 16 students of the total 100. 16 students have a curfew, and they also have to do chores. So they have both. While 4 students still have to do chores, but they also don't have a curfew. Okay, so that's how we read the table. With giving us a total of 20 students have to do chores. Okay, and that would be the 16 plus 4 equals, if I add these together, if 16 have chores, 4 have chores, and these are the ones that have a curfew and don't, the total, when I add those together, should be 20. And that goes the other way too. So 16 have a curfew, another 16 have a curfew, so a total of 32 have a curfew, but 16 have chores, 16 don't. So then these add them up, gives me this bottom, and so on and so forth. So we want to determine if there's an association between having a curfew and having to do chores. To do this, we need to find the relative frequency. Okay, so the relative frequency, you already have it in your definition, is the ratio. Okay, so the relative frequency is going to be a ratio for what we're looking at here. Now, so it's the number of times the event occurs to the total number of events. So if I wanted to know the relative frequency of just having to do chores. So if I said, what's the relative frequency for having to do chores? Well, the total amount of students that have to do chores is 20. So if I'm looking at just doing chores, the relative frequency is the frequency of amount of people that are doing chores is 20 people do chores out of a total of 100 people being polled. So that's 20 out of 100 students have to do chores. So the relative frequency, we're going to convert that to a percentage. So to convert it to a percentage, I divide 20 divided by 100, which is 0.2. And then I move my decimal over twice, and that makes it 20%. So the relative frequency for a teen to have to do chores is 20%. Now what I'm going to do is we're trying to figure out, is there an association between having a curfew and having to do chores? So now I'm going to compare, well, of all these students that have to do chores, how many of them also have a curfew? We're going to see if there's an association here. So now I'm looking at the relative frequency of the chores and curfew. Okay, so we're looking at the relative frequency of the chores and curfew. So now for this one, what we're looking at is I want to look at how many we're comparing these two values right here. So to find the relative frequency of having to do chores among those students who have a curfew. So of all the students that have a curfew, so there's 32 students that have a curfew, I want to know how many of them have to do chores. So of all of the students that have a curfew is 32. And then 16 of them have to do chores. So this is to figure out if there's an association between having a curfew and having to do chores. So of the students that have a curfew, 16 of them, of the 32 students that have a curfew, 16 of them have to do chores. So I can do that division. That gives me 0.5, which is 50%. So if only 20% of students have to do chores, but 50% of students have to do chores that have a curfew. So what I did is I did two different things. I figured out the total amount of people, the total percentage of people that have to do chores. Okay, so 20 people out of the total 100 have to do chores. And then looking at the people who have to do chores of those who have a curfew. So then I'm just combining the two. I'm looking at just the curfews and figuring out, all right, of the people who have a curfew, how many of them have to do chores? It's half of them. So that means there is an association, because this number is quite a bit more than this number. Okay, the students who have a curfew are more likely to have to do chores as well versus the students who don't have a curfew. So what I did is I found the relative frequencies of the two, and because the students who have a curfew have to do chores more often, like more than half the students who have a curfew have to do chores, there is an association, or half of them have to. Okay, so this is more likely to happen, so therefore where not very many, so that means yes, there is an association, because students who have a curfew are more likely to have to do chores, because 50% of students who have a curfew have to do chores, where only 20% of all students have to do chores. Now, sometimes you're going to also have to complete a two-way table from the given information. So this is where you're going to have to read what it says and fill it in. So we have a survey of 50 students, so that's the bottom here. So this is 50. So that means the total here should add up to 50. The total here should add up to 50. 60% of these 50 said that they have a cat. So all the students that have a cat would be here, because cat is this line right here. So this is students with the cat and a dog. This is students with the cat and no dog. But these are the total students that have a cat. So 60% of the 50 said that they have a cat. So what I can do is I can figure out, well, what is 60% of 50? And then to do that, I'm just going to do 0.6 times 50, which is what a calculator is for, and I get 30. So that means 30 students have a cat. Of these 30 students, so of the students who have a cat, so of the 30, 70% also have a dog. So because it says of the students who have the cats, I'm only looking at this number of 30. So of this amount, of all these kids, 70% of these kids have a dog. So now I got to figure out, well, what is 70% of 30? So that's 0.7 times 30, which is 21. So 21 of these students that have a cat also have a dog, which means that 9 don't have a dog. And the reason why is I know there's a total of 30 here. So I filled in one row. Of the students who do not have a cat, well, if 30 have a cat, the ones that don't have a cat, I have to be 20. And the reason why is because 30 plus 20 is 50. So of this group, of the students who do not have a cat, 75% have a dog. So of the students who do not have a cat, that's of these 20, 75% have a dog. So that'd be 75% of 20 would be in this column right here. So again, that's 0.75 times 20, and that's going to be 15. So then now that means my remaining with no dog and no cat would be 5, because 15 plus 5 is 20. And then finally I fill in this. The total students that have a dog is 21 plus 15 is 36. 9 plus 5. So only of the 15 students, only 14 don't have a dog. 20 don't have a cat, and so on and so forth. 36 students have a dog. Okay? So those are the two types of problems we're going to have. We're going to have to describe the association by comparing the relative frequencies, or we're going to have to fill in the table ourselves. Okay, so here we have data from 200 middle schools and high school students were collected. Students were asked whether or not they had visited at least one national park. Is there an association between high school students? Is there an association between being in high school and visiting a national park? So I want to figure out how many of the total students were in high school. So 120 out of the 200 were in high school. Okay. So, and then, actually, you know what? Hold on, let's look at this in a different way. I want to look at what's the relative frequency of visiting a national park first. So, of all the students who have visited a national park, that's what we're really looking at here, right? Of all the students who have visited a national park, that's 105 out of 200. So what I can do is I'm going to change that into a decimal, which is 0.525, and I do that by just doing division. This is 105 divided by 200, and that's 52.5%. So amount of students total that have visited a national park is 52.5%. So I want to figure out, is there an association with being in high school and visiting a national park? So now I want to figure out, of these 105 that have visited the national park, how many of them are high school students? Okay. Or how many, or instead of actually even doing that, now we can compare how many high school students, relative frequency of visiting a park among high school students. So now I want to look at this 80 compared to this 120 here. So I look at 80 over 120. So if you're a high school student that has visited a national park, of the total 120, that's going to get me this 0.667%, which is 66.7%. So yes, there is an association, because high school students are more likely to have visited a national park than middle school students. So there is an association, because 66% of students in high school have visited a national park, or only 52% of students in general have. So there is an association if high school students are more likely to visit national parks than middle school students. And we can also tell that by looking at this, right? If all the students of 105 have visited a national park, if 80 of them are in high school and 25 are in middle school, high school students are definitely more likely to have visited a national park. Okay, try this one on your own. So here we go. We have a survey at school between boys and girls. Okay, and we want to know left-handed, right-handed, boys and girls. We want to figure out, is there an association or not between being a boy and being left-handed? So being a boy and being left-handed. So pause it, try it, and see how you do. So here's what I got. If you are left-handed, there's a 10% probability of you being left-handed, or relative frequency of 10% for people being left-handed based on this survey. There's 24 total left-handed people out of 240. That is 10%. Left-handed boys, if we're looking at just amongst the boys, 14 out of the 140 total are left-handed. So 14 out of 140 boys are left-handed. That is also 10%. So there's no association. Because it's the same amount. Okay, so that just means that it's just as random for being a boy and being a girl. All right, that's it. Finish this up. No things to remember, and thanks for watching. For DS out.